Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Another week, another limited edition Seiko with a stunning dial. My apologies if the content has been a little unbalanced over the last couple of weeks. Because I borrow so many watches from subscribers, I pretty much got to take my chances when they are offered to me, and I was offered the chance to review one of these and I took it. And I was offered this one by a regular contributor to the channel, Gary from Birmingham. Big shout out to you, mate, and a big thank you. Gary has previously loaned me his Halios and his Grand Seiko, so he's a man that knows how to pick a handsome looking watch. This limited edition, inspired by the streets of the Ginza region of Tokyo, reminds me of the time I was wandering through that very region back in 2015. Well, kind of. Anyway, it's a version of their 1959 Seiko Alpinist reissue. There's a few hoops we have to jump through to get here, but I will jump through those with you at the beginning of the video. Now, when I picked this one up from Gary, he actually told me what my moans and niggles list was going to be. So if I can find fault with a watch very quickly, if Gary can find fault with a watch very quickly, why can't designers of these watches find the faults that we find before they release them to market? Answers on a postcard, please. It's still a stunner. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. I wasn't kidding about visiting Ginza in 2015, by the way. Here I am with a deeply dubious asymmetric haircut, clearly hanging on to what was left of my 30s. I was there on a 2-night stopover on the way to the UK. I did all the usual tourist stuff, including this Sky Tree, the tallest building in Tokyo and one of the tallest in the world. And when I looked out of the window, it was as close as I've come to looking at Sim City live. Skyscrapers as far as the eye could see, 14 million people explains a lot. And I did make it to Ginza on my travels, though I must admit I didn't see the cobblestones that were the inspiration for this particular dial. I did see that the Japanese were just as obsessed with Ayrton Senna as I am though, which I found rather pleasing. And I got a little bit obsessed with the vending machines where you could buy anything at any time of day, including beer and these sensational little canned coffees. There he is, the boss, smoking his pipe. Good stuff. And while I was in Ginza, I did sample several of these delicious malty beers. That's what the salaryman gets smashed on Monday through Friday. But anyway, enough memory lane, let's get on to the watch. And I said there were several hoops to jump through to get to this particular model, so let's have a look at those. So this is the original watch, the Seiko Alpinist from 1959. It was their first Alpinist, their first kind of dedicated tool watch aimed at mountaineers. Screw-on case back, a thick boon strap so that perspiration didn't get into the watch, and distinct alpine-like kind of alpine peak markings. Distinct triangles at the 12, the 3, the 6 and 9, and those triangular markers carry on to this model and various others from the Alpinist range today. Seiko being Seiko, they have released a couple of different homages to this watch at a couple of different price points. This was the headliner, the SJE085 they released earlier on this year. It featured a 6L35 movement, was limited to 1959 units and had a price of $2,900 US. Unfortunately, all 19,059 had that awkward date complication at 430-ish. The original watch didn't have it, and I think this one would look so much better if it didn't have it either. But like I said, Seiko being Seiko, they have released several models at several different price points. This is the inverted commas everyday man's version, $750 US with a 6R35 and a date at 3, which I think at least looks better than the date down at 430. Don't worry if you don't like these colour variants. Again, Seiko being Seiko, there'll be one in the colourway of your choosing along anytime now. Including this version on the left here with the Ginza Dial, the SPB259. Interestingly, it's the same price, so they're not charging more for this limited edition. $3,500, so limited but not that limited, if you see what I mean. And there it is, and that dial is magnificent. I will show you plenty of macro in due course. As I said, those patterns supposed to mimic some of the cobblestones in the older streets of Ginza, the ones that weren't populated by overpriced designer handbag shops. Absolutely sensational, definitely one of the best looking Seiko dials that I've seen. So what is this? Well, it's a dressy tool watch and it has one foot firmly in each of those two camps. As such, it is slightly compromised. I feel decisions have been taken on the dressier side that hamper it as a tool watch and vice versa. But overall, I don't think it does too badly at all. A really interesting proposition. If you're not into this dial, as I said, there are plenty of other versions and I have no doubt there will be plenty more versions to come. Nice set of dimensions on all of them. Those being 38.5mm in diameter, 13.1mm thick, 45.6mm lug to lug, so definitely wearable. 19mm lug width. Thanks Seiko for that one. Bit of a taper down to 17.5, back up to 19 at the clasp. Sized up for me, I had to add 2 links into Gary's setup, 139 grams. So yeah, it's got a bit of chunk to it, but under 150 as you'd expect from a slightly smaller than average watch. So 316L stainless steel, case crown unsigned, fixed bezel, full stainless steel bracelet, solid end links, solid links with a pin and collar system, and we have a proper milled clasp. The clasp is beautifully sculpted on the underside for a really smooth fit as well. 200 meters of water resistance and a screw down crown. I actually went to pull it but forgot it was part of the Prospex range, being an alpinist, and had a screw down crown which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I guess 200 meters of water resistance means it's going to be a little bit chunkier as well. Like I said, a couple of compromises here and there, but overall I think it hangs it all together quite nicely. Now that is a single domed sapphire crystal. You do get a little bit of vintage style distortion at the edges of the viewing angle. You can see that when I take this one outside in a minute or two as well. Overall, if it is aping the look of a watch from 1959, I think that is perfectly appropriate. Case finish is, I think, an appropriate and harmonious mixture of dressy polish finish and tooly brushed finish. So you have a high polish stepped bezel and you have high polished chamfer to the case. The majority of it though is brushed, the side and the upper lug surfaces. As noted, the crown is unsigned, but it is decently grippy, which it needs to be if it is screwed down. And again, a nice mixture of brush and polish on the bracelet as well. Kind of reminds me of the bracelet on my old Seiko Sarks that I had a couple of years ago. Female end links, which is great, even though there are gaps in the way the end links fit into the case, which I'm sure are visible from space. Now the clasp itself is stamped with the Seiko, only 2 holes of micro adjust there. I think that is one of the dressy compromises that this watch has to deal with. And if I pop the spring bar in that clasp, I can show you the movement through a display case back. Now I believe the display case back is just Hardlex. It says top sapphire crystal, so I'm guessing that is Hardlex. And there is printing on it, it's Seiko and limited edition there, but you can still get a decent enough view of the 6R35A. So that is a 24 jewel hacking and bi-directional winding movement from Seiko in-house. Obviously, it has a whopping 70-hour power reserve. That was one of the big advantages of them moving away from the old 6R50. They pushed the power reserve right up to 70 hours. Not a lot of decoration going on here, but nice to see the movement in the back of the watch nonetheless. And there you are, Gary. I hope you're watching this one, mate. When we met up and had a chat about the watch, Gary suggested that it was going to be running fast. He asked me to put it in the time grapher. Stated tolerances of the 6R35 are -15 to +25 seconds a day, so it's perfectly within the tolerances that Seiko set. But yeah, +17 seconds a day, it is running a bit fast, mate. These can be easily adjusted. You could pop the back off this and tweak it with a screwdriver, but it is slightly disappointing to get one that's running at the upper edges of that envelope, especially considering it's basically a brand new watch. But we don't buy automatic watches for their accuracy, do we? No, we buy them because some of them have dials as mesmerizing as this one. It really is pretty spectacular. So as discussed several times already, it's the Ginza cobblestones, kind of brick patterning there. Very interesting layout as well, almost like a sector dial divided into 8 pizza slices, if you will. We have applied indices harking back to the original Alpinist from 1959 with that distinctive triangle at 12, triangles at 6 and triangle at 9, and they're split. The 6 and 9 split down the middle, the 12 split into 3. Very nice effect. Applied indices everywhere else, baton shape, but they do taper in towards the pinion. Frame around the date complication there at 3 o'clock, and a minute track that sits inboard of the indices. Again, very interesting effect. I love the colours with this one as well. Kind of grey, blue, very dynamic, as you'll see when I'm moving it around in just a minute or two. And I love the duck egg blue second hand setting the whole thing off perfectly. Applied Seiko logo above the pinion. That looks great from the angle. I'll show you that in just a second. Prospex X automatic and 20 bar, 200 meters of water resistance therefore, just printed above the index at 6. Looks spectacular on an angle as well. How good does that Seiko logo look? It looks like it's floating there on top of the dial. Similarly, the triangular indices at the 12, the 6 and 9 have quite a bit of height and therefore cast little shadows over the dial. Very nice indeed. And the hands, I love what Seiko do with these hands. Dauphine hands, super sharp, very nicely finished in this case as well, and half polished, half brushed. Really very nice effect. This is the 4th or 5th Seiko now that I have reviewed with this half and half handset. Bevel down the middle, plenty of depth to them as well. It's a great look overall. And of course, being a Seiko from the Prospex range, there's a decent amount of lume on those hands and on the applied indices as well. Seiko's Lumi Bright does okay for itself usually. No exception in this case either. It's the green style rather than the blue style. I love those segmented indices at the 12, the 6 and the 9. Really nice effect. When I crank the speed up, it does okay for itself. Like I said, there are compromises between its dressier side and its toolier side, but overall, the lume is pretty decent. I think it wears nicely as well. I've got a 7-inch wrist for your reference. It wears somewhere in between the Sarks that I referenced earlier on and the Seiko Sarb, which is going to be referenced in perpetuity to every single 38mm dressy Seiko from here on out. Yeah, nice bracelet. You can see how that one reacts to the light. Mixture of brushed and polished surfaces. But the clasp there, you can see a carryover from the Sarb in that it doesn't quite sit nearly as flush as you'd like it to. I've got no problems with the thickness. I think maybe my wrist is slightly larger than Gary's, so it's not something that concerns me. And that dial is just mesmerizing from pretty much every angle that you look at it. Overhead legibility is actually okay. The half and half handset always does well, attracting a bit of light here and there, adding to the definition and the legibility. And the silver handset do okay for themselves against that kind of blue-grey dial. Outside natural light, if I move this one around, it's almost like a kaleidoscope, if you're old enough to remember what a kaleidoscope was. Really, really interesting effect. As I said, looks different from every single angle that you subject this watch to. That vintage style single dome sapphire means you do get a bit of distortion, kind of bubbled at the edges of the viewing angle, but overall I think it suits the watch. On wrist, it's a nice size, it's a nice shape, it's a nice weight. Little bit of downturn from those lugs as well, and you've got that quite dynamic bracelet to offset the quite dynamic dial. Yeah, bit of a gap there though from the bracelet clasp. That is going to be in the moans and niggle section. 13.1mm thick as noted, but that is still going to slip under a cuff very easily, particularly as it does have that domed sapphire crystal to help it. But what then are the moans and niggles, or what was Gary's list of moans and niggles? As I said, he handed me this section of the video when he handed me the watch. Well, he complained about the thickness. I don't think it's too bad. I think it's an acceptable compromise for 200 meters of water resistance. 200 meters of water resistance might be slightly excessive though, all things considered. He did complain about the 19mm lug width and the compromised clasp with only 2 holes of micro adjust. Yeah, it really should have 3 or 4. I'm going to add a little bit of gap there. Not great, very reminiscent of the old Seiko Sarb. He highlighted the fact that he thought this one was running fast, and plus 18, plus 20 seconds a day for a brand new watch that costs $750 US retail. Not all that auspicious, is it? Sorry Gary, I'm going to add one more niggle about this one. I think there's a couple of dust specks under this dial. Made in Japan it may be, but it's still not impervious to dust. I reckon there's one just inboard of the 8 o'clock index and one just inboard of the 2 o'clock index. Now the hands, I've already said, are super sharp. Date frame, not so much. I think there's a rough edge, particularly on the edge in towards the pinion. They could definitely have done with checking this one a bit more thoroughly. But hey, we all know what we're getting into when we buy a Seiko these days, don't we? There's a price to be paid, and that price often extends beyond the monetary fee. Rough edges here and there, quality control issues, little bits of dust are creeping into pretty much every single model that I come across these days, so be warned. But does that even matter when you have a dial as spectacular as this one? That is a decision for you all to make. Gary, I think, has already made his choice. But overall, an interesting model, and like I said, one that falls between tooly and dressy and actually does quite well at both of those things. $750 USD, not quite as cheap as I would like it to be, but hey, shop around, I'm sure you can get a little bit off that. And you are getting that bonus dial. You're getting a limited edition dial and you're not paying any extra for it, which I was frankly a little bit surprised by. So another week, another limited edition Seiko and another stunning dial, and frankly, they keep getting better and better. So there you have it, well done, you've almost made it to the end of the video. Thanks very much. If you're keen on the Seiko Alpinist range, why not check out my review of one of their relatively recent models, or the OG SARB 017. Thanks for watching, see you all soon.